I have some satisfying Karen and terrible neighbor stories for you today. Check out this video in podcast form by searching Austin Stories wherever you listen, or check the video description for a link. Time to sue Karen with updates. Neighbors use my property as their own. Paid for new fence. I recently bought a house and have been having some work done before I move in. It was empty on the market for about 6 or 8 months before I bought it. One morning, I got a call from my contractor asking me about moving the cars in the driveway, and of course, I had no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't moved in yet. I left my job site and I drove nearly a half an hour to get there. As soon as I arrived, the people on the east side of me were walking toward the cars. I asked if they were their cars, and they said yes. They told me that they had been parking there for a few months with permission from the owners. I informed them that I was the new owner and they can't park there any longer. We went back and forth, and with the intention of being a good neighbor and trying to show some goodwill, I agreed to allow them to park there for a few more weeks until I move in, with the agreement that they would move them by 6 a.m. every morning. The rest of the week went by without incident. The contractor called me about scheduling a walkthrough on Saturday, and we set a time for early afternoon. When I arrived, there were 4 cars in the driveway and nowhere to park. The only on-street parking is 2 blocks away. I called them and asked them to move their vehicles, reminding them of our agreement. After 20 minutes, they finally came out and moved them. Speaking with them, they claimed to have misunderstood and thought our agreement only referred to weekdays and not weekends. I corrected them and I moved on. Sunday morning, I grabbed a trailer and loaded some furniture to take over and store in the garage. Once again, there were cars in the driveway. I called them and I got voicemailed. I texted and said they had until a tow truck could arrive to get them moved. No answer, so I called a tow company. 45 minutes later, 2 tow trucks showed up, backed in and hooked up to the cars. All of a sudden, the neighbors were home. They ran out to stop their cars from being towed, and it ended up costing them a little over $300 to get them unhooked. I called my contractor and asked if he knew someone who could put in a driveway gate, and he did. I let my neighbors know that they could no longer use my driveway. On Wednesday, I get a call from the gate installer telling me that there are cars in the driveway. I called them and said that tow trucks are on the way, and they moved. The gate was installed and I went by to pick up the opener that evening. The neighbor husband came out to confront me and I opted to just call the police department and deal with it legally. That Saturday, I went by to accept an outdoor furniture delivery and check on things when I noticed a towel beside the pool and small kids' flotation device. My initial thought was that I just hadn't noticed it before, so I wrote it off and threw them both in the trash. On Saturday, the movers arrived with everything and we began moving things in. At about 7 p.m., my daughter and I left to go grab some dinner, arriving back at the house around 9:30 p.m. The neighbors were in my pool. They were hanging out and using my furniture. And when I opened the door and began raising heck, they told the kids to go to the house, and the children ran to a corner of our fence and just walked through. They had cut out the privacy fence so it could be removed and had been using the pool at their leisure for who knows how long. Again, I called the police and filed a complaint. The dad was arrested for trespassing, DPP, and an outstanding warrant, and the oldest boy, 20, for an outstanding warrant. I replaced the fence with a new one because they had destroyed the post, runners, and pickets by removing and reinstalling the panel. Small Claims awarded me the total cost of 83 feet of 8-foot privacy fence, which came out to $3,800. The following Monday morning around 5 a.m., their cars were parked in the street where there's no street parking, so I made a phone call. They were gone when I left at 7 a.m. I haven't been paid yet, but I did notice a "for rent" sign in their yard this morning, so that's just as good. Good riddance. The update. For those of you suggesting a security system, one was installed that next week, along with 6 cameras around the house, a Ring doorbell, and a fence around the pool itself to keep the dogs and my grandson out of it. I'll be closing and covering the pool in the next few weeks. Now, I met with the owner of the house yesterday evening. The house will be empty by the end of the week. They were evicted for non-payment of rent, likely due to tow charges, and the husband not working because he was incarcerated, where he remains. The warrant was for back child support. The wife apologized and claimed that she was told they had permission to use the pool. They didn't. The material for the fence was purchased through my company account. I'm a structural engineer and a commercial construction manager for a large local GC. Only 2 posts had to be replaced and a handful of runners. The rest was just 8 feet of 1 by 6.5 inch pressure treated pickets, which cost me $2.60 per stick, times 210 pickets purchased. The rest was labor and fasteners, so altogether about $900 for material and stain, $150 for a dumpster, and the rest went toward labor to finish it on a weekend. Fun fact though, I'm also a property investor and flipper. Been in construction, commercial, civil, industrial, and residential for 35 years. It's not my first fence and not my first butt neighbor. Now before the paint experts jump on board, I know how long I have to wait before pressure washing and staining the fence. And now the petty was only my twisting the knife by having their cars towed from the street when they weren't affecting me at all. So what do you do when you're in this situation here when they're using your pool? I mean, you could try to talk through with them, right? But seriously, let's be honest here. If they're using your pool and a bunch of other things, trespassing with your fence, your house, your street, and the towing, they're not going to listen. What have you done? Neighbor's landlord gave someone permission to cut down my trees. Hey everyone, I am very upset over what went down today on my property without my consent. I own my property in upstate New York in a city, and the lot next to me has 2 duplexes on it. The duplex in the back of the lot is built right up along our property line and border, which is pretty normal. There have been multiple tenants there over the past few years that have thrown their trash out their windows into my backyard, but that's beside the point. This afternoon, I looked out my back window and saw a ladder set up in my yard to get to their roof and a decent chunk of trees gone from my yard. I immediately went outside to take pictures of everything and to call my partner. My yard is now also covered in nails and old shingles, and a couple of my trees were trimmed where they crossed the property line, which I know is legal and fine. I don't care about those. But 3 of my trees were completely cut down to the stump and discarded also in my backyard. One of the roofers saw me take the pictures and came down to tell me that the owner of the property they were working on said to just cut away anything in their way. Pointed out that the trees were only 3 to 4 inches in diameter each, so not a big deal, and said that if I wanted, he would go to Home Depot and buy me new trees on the spot. I've never met the neighboring landlord and in no way gave him permission to come onto my property, let other people onto my property, or to cut down my trees. I got his contact information and spoke to him over the phone. He claimed that he had tried to talk to me but couldn't because I was never home. I have a full-time job, and when I pointed out that he had no permission to cut my trees, he threatened to sue me because another tree that they had trimmed had allegedly caused damage to said roof. I was never notified or approached about that in the past. My backyard is very small, but part of the appeal for my partner and I is that it's very green and has a lot of trees and vines that keep it shaded, somewhat private, and naturally beautiful in an otherwise overcrowded and gray area of the city. And now a chunk of that has been stripped away. I'm meeting with a family friend that works in local code enforcement tomorrow, but my parents think I should just let it go. Meanwhile, I'm just so upset and stressed and anxious about this, and I know tree law is kind of a big deal, so I was hoping someone here could let me know if there's something I can pursue, and if I should be worried about him countersuing for those supposed roof damages. Do you agree with this answer? The roofer offered to buy you new trees because he knows he is big time screwed. New York tree laws are nothing to laugh at. New York law allows for a penalty of 3 times the timber value, or $250, or both, for each tree removed without owner permission, plus whatever city laws were broken. Consult a property attorney ASAP. Do you think lawyering up is the best thing to do here? Let me know. Neighbor cites us for having sticks on our property. I received a letter in the mail from our city stating that we have violated one of the ordinances in our city. Apparently, we have a pile of brush and sticks in the backyard, which, according to the ordinance, you cannot have any large amounts of debris on your yard. Here's the thing. We do not pay for or live in an HOA community, so I can't understand why someone would have a problem with some extra nature on somebody's backyard. The sticks are in my backyard and facing the neighbor's backyard, so it would be impossible for anyone from either street to actually see a pile of sticks at that location. The person would have to go into mine or my neighbor's yard to actually see it. We now have 2 weeks to get all of this removed, or we will be cited and taken to court if we refuse to pay. No amount has been posted for the citation yet. The reason for this post is that my neighbor, who I never met before and was told is never in the house as he or she lives permanently in Florida, we live in Ohio, complained about the pile of sticks on my property. I just don't understand why someone has the need to make someone else's life more miserable because they don't like something on someone else's property. They are just sticks. What harm are they going to do to you or your house? The neighbor's house is about 20 yards away from the stick pile too. The funny part about this is the stick pile has been there for over a year. We bought our current house about 1 year ago and hired a guy to cut down a decaying large tree in the backyard. He obviously did not do his job and clean up all the sticks from our place, but he placed them all in the back and has been there since. I thought about calling up the tree guy that we hired, but he was just a guy with no business entity and I no longer have his phone number either. I am really torn on just not doing anything, but I really don't want to gamble on paying money I don't have. An update. I talked to my neighbor to the right of me, who we are very friendly with and definitely did not rat on us, and they told me that neither neighbor behind us would not have a problem like that. So I talked to the house directly behind me, and an elderly lady lives there all alone. I spoke with her, and she was extremely nice and was very surprised that someone would do that in our neighborhood. So that rules out that house. However, there's another house next to hers where the owner is an eccentric 85-year-old millionaire. So I will be trying him next. Do you agree or disagree with this take? I definitely see what's wrong with that person, but you could just throw the sticks away and be done with it. Well, right, I could just get rid of it and the problem solved. I just hate it when someone cannot keep their head out of someone else's business. It feels like a threat with the money, since it could end in a fine if I don't do it, but it did no harm at all to the owner. Like if the sticks were on their property, sure, I would no doubt get rid of them. But if they're on my property, come on. Sounds like these people just want drama. What would you do about this? Don't fire the guy who holds the patents. This is my father's story. He had a degree in mechanical engineering, either a master's or a doctorate. It had taken him many years to get, and he was very proud of that. Thanks to his training, he had found his way working for many well-known companies, working primarily with the procedures used to make various things. Over time, he privately began working on an idea that would revolutionize how school and gym lockers worked. See, my father realized that there was a problem with those type of metal lockers. Namely, it was very easy for a person to break into them. What's more, as the lockers were designed, there were multiple exposed moving parts, which meant that if a student put too many books in one, or really anything got against the door, the locker could be jammed shut, making it near impossible to open. So, for several years, Dad toyed with a number of ideas before hitting on a new design which would solve all of those problems. The inner workings of those lockers' locking mechanism would be contained within the door in such a way that 1. It was impossible for someone to shim or break into, and 2. The entire mechanism would be enclosed, and 3. It was, relatively maintenance-free. Now, at this point, my father was the vice president of manufacturing, and apparently there wasn't a clause in his contract that said that if he designed anything while working for the company, then he had to turn that over to them for profit. Dad still approached the company, offering them the design, but they weren't interested. Dad sat on the design for a while before eventually just taking out several patents on them and then forgetting about them. About 6 months after his first attempt at getting the company interested, the parent company's owner and chairman of the board passed away, and the board opted to sell off some of the holdings. The company that my dad worked for was part of that. The new owners were young guys who seemed to think that they knew everything, as young business owners always seem to think, and they set about changing 99% of the way things were being done. At some point, they stumbled across the plans that my father had designed. Now, that's where things turned curious. They really wanted to start producing this new design, but as they didn't have all the plans and processes laid out for them, they had to turn to my father for answers. Rather than asking him how to do it, or licensing the patents, as any reputable company would have done. They ordered him to turn over all of his work, or else they would fire him. Dad stood his ground and refused. The new owners and my father went back and forth, arguing over details for several weeks, before finally the new owners fired my father for insubordination. So, on to the revenge. There may be more to this, but I'm not entirely sure if it's just pro-revenge. It could border on nuclear based on what happened some years later, though I'm not certain that what later happened had anything to do with my father's actions. So after cleaning out his office and packing things in the trunk of his car, my father headed home and made a few phone calls. He must have gone through 8 or 9 different calls before he got in touch with someone who was interested in what he had to say. See, my dad was under no illusions that the company had fired him wasn't going to just make those patented lockers on their own. He also knew that, though the company itself was relatively small, the owners had money and there was no way that he could fight them. However, a larger company could. So he contacted the major competitors and made them an offer. He eventually set up a meeting with some people, wheeled out the prototype that he'd made, explained how everything worked, and noted that, with this system, the company could revolutionize the way that lockers were both designed and improve both safety and security. What's more, as he was the only patent holder for the next 7 years or so, that company could be the only company to produce them. The competitor jumped at the chance and bought all the patents, both for the design and the process. They even paid my dad a substantial consultancy fee to go out to their manufacturing site and teach their crews how to make the needed tool and die sets to produce them. Less than 6 months after the first company had fired him, their number one competitor was completely destroying them in the market with this new design. And there wasn't a dang thing the first company could do about it. They did try suing my father, claiming that he had stolen their intellectual property, but that case quickly evaporated when they had to admit under oath that they'd never actually signed a contract with him, and there was no requirement that he turn over anything he had created to the company. In the 7 years from when the second company bought the locker design and the process patents, they pretty handily moved into markets that previously they'd been unable to. The first company soldiered on, but by the time the patent had finally expired, they were a shadow of their former selves. The new owners had sold the company at a loss, with the competitor buying it, only to shut that production facility down due to redundancy. Put maybe 200 people out of work, though given how they'd lost so much business, I wager it was far less than that. So yeah, the new guys don't want to play ball, threaten the guy that holds the patents on something that they want to do, and then fire him, only to have him take everything to their competitor and effectively put them out of business. I was asked that, I don't know what the degree level was. Well, my father and I had a very difficult relationship. There are some very good few memories I have of him, and it wasn't until shortly before his death in 2007 from a stroke that I really started to connect with him. I resented him for most all of my life because he was more career-minded than anything. I figure we moved some 10 times in 20 years, and it greatly affected me. For a rather long period of time, I am ashamed to say, I hated my father and wanted nothing to do with him. So I must have ended up wealthy, huh? Well, no, not really. Any money that Dad earned off of his little endeavor was lost after an incident that left him disabled. Medical bills being what they are, by the end of it, we were pretty much broke. If you say that patents last 20 years, well, design patents don't. They last 14, but the courts have historically sided with companies infringing on design patents after 7 years, so long as the infringing company develops their own method to produce whatever design is being used and modifies or changes it. I can't tell you what company it was, but a variation of how the owners didn't know, that answer is pure speculation on my part. However, I got the impression that the owners were in their mid to late 20s and trying to act like investors. The company was on offer relatively cheap from what I know, but had a rather long history in the manufacturing field. This is a perfect case of, we're going to come in because we know everything and just completely gut out the company and without doing your due diligence, and it comes back to bite you. What have you done if you were OP? Karen demands a free car when she gets jealous over my property. Click the video on your screen to find out what happens to this Karen, and I'll see you there.